And welcome to another Talk Within the Nine-Sided Circle with your hosts,
Nor Kyle and
Mushtaq Ali. And we are here coming to you tonight from beautiful downtown planet Earth, the garden spot of the galaxy, where every day is a holiday, or something like that.
it's somewhere.
Yeah. I always forget if it's every day is a holiday or every day is hell day or something. I can never get those right.
Some.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as you can see, my usual backdrop is not up because I am getting ready to go on the next step of my walkabout, which reminds me I should tell you all now, and I'll tell you again at the end of the recording if I can remember, that there will be no talk next week because next week I will be in transit and my poor computer will be all boxed up, and I doubt if I will have it open in time to do the talk. But we will have another regular talk the week after, God willing. So tonight, we are going to talk about the use of teacher plants in the work. This is very controversial these days because teacher plants have somehow become conflated with drugs. And I will tell you that teacher plants are not drugs any more than your own neurotransmitters are drugs. And I will say that historically, every culture that has had access to them has used teacher plants. And I'm defining teacher plants as plants that have a psychedelic effect. The word psychedelic means mind manifesting. It doesn't mean hallucinogenic. There are plenty of plants that produce no hallucinogens and yet are mind manifesting. And if we look at some of the oldest literature in the world, and in this case, the Rig Veda, you all know what the Rig Veda is? The oldest existent scriptures on Hinduism. There is an entire chapter in that dedicated to something called Soma, S-O-M-A. Now, Soma was a drink, and it was also a god that's a drink. Coca-Cola would have loved to pull that one off, but couldn't quite do it. And the Rig Veda has all of these hymns to Soma. Now, there have been, and interestingly enough, in Iran, in pre-Islamic Iran, during the Zoroastrian times, the times of the Magi, they had the same thing, and it was called Hauma rather than Soma. It's just a little shift in consonants, but it was, as far as we can tell, the same substance used the same way.
How is that spelled, that word? Hauma.
H-A-O-M-A, I believe. It's been a while since I've seen it written out. But the ancient Iranian peoples used this as well. And there's been a lot of controversy over what Soma/Hauma is. R. Gordon Wasson, the great Western mycologist, thought that it was Amanita muscaria mushrooms. This is pretty much not thought of as probable anymore because they don't really grow in India or in Iran. They don't grow on the Iranian plateau very well. They need a more temperate climate and evergreen forests to really thrive. Terence McKenna makes an argument for Soma being psilocybin mushrooms, and he points to the the deification of the cow. And if you know anything about psilocybin mushrooms, the place that they like to grow the most, the place that you are most likely to find them anywhere in the world, is on cow flops. They love to grow in cow manure. But Terrence and I used to go round and round on this because I have a totally different view on it. And my view goes to reading a lot of the ancient texts of Iran. And my personal belief, for which I cannot really give you any scientific substantiation, is that soma was actually a combination drink that was made from an extract of the roots of the Arundodonax and the seeds of the Pigalim harmala. Now, Pigalim harmala is better known as Syrian rue. And as Zainab can tell you, Syrian rue is used even today as both an incense and a seasoning in Iran. During Nowruz, you will get beautiful trays of sholazar, for instance, that will have the name of Ali spelled out in Syrian rue seeds, stuff like that. And it is still burned in like the Yazidi temples, I believe, assuming that there are any of those left after the assholes of Daesh burned everything down. But what you get when you extract these two plants, Arundodonax is the giant river cane, and which is known as ney in Arabic and Persian. And you get an extract that can be pretty close to pure DMT, dimethyltryptamine, if you get the right varietal. And I'm not going to tell you what the right varietal is. And when you combine that with the Pigalim harmala, the Syrian rue seed, that's very, very high in harmaline, which is the same chemical found in the yahe vine, the Banisteriopsis caapi, which is an MAO inhibitor. That's monoamine oxidase, which breaks down things like serotonin in the body. So if you were to eat or drink pure dimethyltryptamine, it would do absolutely nothing to you. It is so close to your own neurotransmitters that your body recognizes and neutralizes it instantly. But if you add a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, like harmaline and harmine, which are found in that seed, all of a sudden that DMT becomes orally active. We most know this not from the ancient Middle East, but from South America, because those two chemicals are found within the plants that create ayahuasca. So interestingly, you have these two very, very separated by time and space cultures that use, there is Nancy. We're going to stop everything and say hi to Nancy. Hello, Nancy.
Hello.
We were
Hi,
missing
Nancy.
you.
Glad you made it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry I'm late.
Yeah, we were
No
worried.
worries. Just glad you're here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm fine. Just late.
that's okay. As long as you're fine. So,
I want to take a question
yes.
from the chat. Aaron
Yes.
asked about the name of the substance we're talking about, the drinks. He says, is that an Avestic word?
Halma
Guessing he's talking about Halma, yeah.
Yes, that's an Avestic word.
All right. Thanks for answering that. Moving on.
So this is just a little background here. This is going to get much more interesting very, very quickly, but you have to get through the science before you can get to the metaphysics. Otherwise, the metaphysics is just so much fluff. So The thing that these two substances have in common is that besides being made virtually from the same chemical makeup, is that they produce the same effects, which are these profound visionary states. And I am not telling you this theoretically, because I have had the chance to drink both ayahuasca and hauma in my lifetime, and they are very, very similar. Setting makes a difference. Ayahuasca is best partaken of in the jungles of South America, and hauma is best taken in the Sufi orders of Iran or Azerbaijan, the few who know how to do that anymore. You can't say this in Iran. They will actually probably kill you if you talk about doing this, let alone actually do it. So, because of the most profound effect of this. Now, along with this, and these substances, these plants will work on the 5 HT neuroreceptors, which are basically your serotonin receptors. Serotonin is a very interesting neurotransmitter, and it's not the pleasure transmitter, but it's the happiness transmitter. Dopamine is what you get for experiencing pleasure, but serotonin allows you to experience happiness, contentment, and deep religious experiences. Now, there are other substances that do the same thing, most notably psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin and psilocin are a member of the same family as dimethyltryptamine. They are tryptamine-based psychedelics. And they have very much the same effect. Milder, unless you eat a whole lot of mushrooms, but milder. And also things like morning glory seeds, ergot mold, and a few other substances. Morning glory seeds and ergot mold both contain various forms of lysergic acid. And we know lysergic acid most familiarly today as lysergic acid diethylamide, which is LSD. Now, all of these produce very similar effects, the most profound of which is DMT. It's the strongest, and I think takes you the deepest most of the time. Now, what does this do? I should also mention that there's another class of psychedelics that are found in plants like the peyote cactus, the San Pedro. Nutmeg and mace contain them as well, and these are the phenethylamines. And they also work on the 5-HP receptor. And also others. All of these will work on, they will play all of your neuroreceptors like chords almost to get certain effects. But the key here is the serotonin neuroreceptor or neurotransmitter, and the receptor sites are the key to make this specific effect that we find. And what is this effect, you may ask? We have recently, from the point of view of science, discovered the most probable mechanism by which real psychedelics, the tryptamine acting psychedelics, work in the human brain. And that is specifically on the thalamus and hypothalamus, where this is the area of your brain that filters stuff out. And what it seems to do is eases up on the filters, so it lets more information in. And this is important because the process of filtering stuff out is habitual. Over your lifetime, it's like your brain gets grooved, and it stays in those grooves, and it only hears what those grooves hear, and it only sees what those grooves see, unless you encounter something that breaks that conditioning, and all of a sudden you get a great deal more information coming in. Food for thought. All of the things that we could be seeing that we aren't seeing. And
Do you want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, this is where we're going to move from the scientific to the metaphysical, from the physical to the metaphysical. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take off my scientist hat and put on my shaman hat. Actually, I don't have any hats, so you're just going to have to imagine these hats being switched out. So, from a certain point of view, all life contains consciousness, or all life is conscious to a certain extent. We would say a single-celled amoeba probably doesn't have as much consciousness as a multi-celled organism. Creatures with big brains maybe have more consciousness or faster consciousness. But from a shamanic point of view, everything has consciousness of one sort or another. And there are some certain plants that seem to work symbiotically with human beings. Not the least of which, and not the least important of which, is the psilocybin mushroom. It is very likely that this was one of the very, very first psychedelics that human beings encountered. My friend Terence McKenna hypothesized that back when we were pretty much a pack of apes following the herds, hoping to cut off and devour some sickly beast or young'un, that we would have encountered mushrooms growing in the manure left by the herd animals, say wild cattle in Northern Europe or in the Indian subcontinent. So here you have Homo erectus following the path of the herds, and they nibble on these mushrooms because they were a little hungry. Oh, they look pretty. They turn blue when you pick them. They must be good. And the next thing you know, the universe opens up. So before that, though, and this is something that is an interesting thought, psilocybin in small doses improves visual acuity. And if you are a hunter on the savannas following herd animals, if you have greater visual acuity than the tribe next door, you have a much higher survival value or survival potential than the people with less visual acuity. So there's an interesting juxtaposition there, which encourages psychedelic use. Terence also suggested that it was the meeting of the mind of the mushroom and the mind of the human being that created consciousness in our ancestors. To me, this seems pretty near-fetched because of that thing where it opens up the ability to take in more information, wider bandwidth than you usually experience. So, where is this all going? And Nancy points out
Nancy
that,
asks,
yes.
yes. Nancy points out visual acuity would help with gathering too.
Yep. It helps with hunting, it helps with gathering, and it helps to not get et by larger predators. All of these things. So, here you have this idea that true psychedelics have been used since time immemorial, since our earliest ancestors, and they've been used for the same purpose, which is to enhance life and to have profound, meaningful, deep experiences, and to literally to expand our consciousnesses. So, how does this all tie in with the work? And the answer is, it actually does, because now remember, outside of India, one of the places where you have this tradition is on the Iranian plateau. And the Iranian plateau is a hotbed of Sufism for most of the last 1,000 years or more. A lot of the Sufi orders include this fellow by the name of Salman Farsi, who was one of the companions of the Prophet in their lineage, as being one of the first people. Now Salman Farsi would be translated as Salman the Persian. And he was a guy who got wind of this happening in Arabia, and literally sold himself into slavery to get there so that he could meet this new teacher. And he would have brought this tradition with him because he was well trained in the Zoroastrian traditions. He was a magi as far as we can tell. And he brought a lot of things with him that turned out that were very useful to the early Muslim community, like military tactics, various things like that. In any event, within some, but not all, Sufism of the Iranian plateau in Central Asia, there has been a semi-shamanic tradition of the use of what is not now called halma, but actually is, making this extract from Syrian rue and arundadonax. And it would not be used by everybody, only under certain conditions, and usually in khalwat, in retreat. And certainly not admitted to these days. You know, I can get away with talking about this stuff because I live in the United States. And I ain't telling you where nor when this might have happened in any place, anywhere on the Iranian plateau. But let's assume that it did. What would it do? Can you imagine? The most powerful hallucinogen, the most powerful psychedelic known to man, ingested by people who are seeking ultimate truth, in a very, very controlled environment where everything is pointed at the thing that they're looking for. Thoughts?
Dave says it would be auspicious.
And Aaron also made an observation here. I've heard a theory that part of our ability to remember may be from a viral infection in our early evolution. This could be complex cells and multi-celled organisms were often colony organisms in the beginning. So sure, why not? It's possible. We would have incorporated those things into our cellular makeup, and who knows what would happen. Nancy says more efficient.
So Nancy's comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's talking about substance usage.
And I would say,
well, it's part of.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's like an enhancement to meditation.
Yeah.
Part of. Yeah.
And without meditation, you do not know how to navigate these areas.
I was wondering about that part.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that. And for this, I have to pull from my own life experience. Now, most of you know that I'm an old hippie, right? I was running around San Francisco in 1967, getting into trouble, sticking it to the man, all of this kind of stuff. But what you may not know, because I look kind of pale in comparison to a lot of folks, is that I was raised in the Native American church. And for those of you who do not know the Native American church, that's also known as the peyote church, which is the one legal psychedelic religion in America. Father's side of the family was predominantly Native American, and we were all big on that. And I sort of kind of moved away from the church in the mid to late 1980s. I kind of moved on from it, but for a large portion of my life, I went to a Native American church meeting almost every Saturday. They're held Saturday night to Sunday morning as a rule. And that means that I got to learn how to navigate psychedelics. And in a really very, very structured way, because Native American church ceremony is not a bunch of people eating peyote and tripping out. It is a very, very serious, very, very deftly choreographed ceremony that uses specific rituals to focus everybody in the exact same direction. It has its own meditative techniques. They're implicit rather than explicit, but you learn them as you learn the core parts of the service, which have to do with singing and drumming. The songs of the Native American church are very, very specific. The rhythm on the drums is very, very specific. And they are all designed to focus your awareness in such a way that the, as we call it, the medicine, can work within you. And those people who are members of the church understand that peyote is not just a cactus. It's definitely not a drug. It's a spirit that resides within the morphic resonance of all peyote cactus, to switch to more modern terms. And it also has nothing to do with anything that Carlos Castaneda ever said about it. The man was a fraud and a liar. You heard it first here, or you heard it second here, or third.
Do you want to give very, very tiny synopsis of that for those who don't know what you mean?
Yeah, back in the early 1960s, Carlos Castaneda, who was doing his graduate work at UCLA, wrote a book, which was his graduate thesis called The Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge, where he talked about his experiences with peyote and peyote ceremonies. And it was entirely fabricated. And it was obvious to anybody who had any experience with working with the peyote cactus that his experiences were those of a madman, not somebody who was working with the cactus. The things that he described do not happen when you eat peyote. And he also worked with datura, and supposedly, though I kind of doubt that too, because I don't have any personal experience with datura because I'm not that stupid. But I have a lot of secondhand experience from the days when I worked in neuropsych wards, because some dumbass kid would read teachings of Don Juan, decide he was going to be a sorcerer, and go out and eat datura seeds and end up on the psych ward completely messed up. Anyway, sorry, this is a sore point for me. Let me pull back from that and just say that the Native American church and also the Huichol Indians down in Mexico have a tradition that is different but similar, the way they work with the peyote cactus. Yes, Nancy, you should assume that that was all nonsense.
She says.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Hmm?
Yeah, Nancy said, should I assume that all the sorcerer versus sorcerer stuff was nonsense? And my answer is yes. But I don't want to make this a discussion of Castaneda and his misadventures and the people who were deluded by him or anything like that, because we have more important things to talk about. So, Native American church teaches you from the moment you set foot in that teepee, and even before you go in, because there is a culture around it that trains you in how to handle the experience, how to work with the plant as it works with you. And it's very well thought out. It's very well tested. You know, and there are literally hundreds of years of testing behind the way they do this. Native American church was only founded in the late 1900s, but the so-called peyote religion was around a lot before that. Native American church was founded on the suggestion of an American anthropologist by the name of Kroeber, to people like Quanah Parker, so that they could protect their tradition. He said, you know, if you make this an Indian tradition, the United States government will wipe you out. But if you make it a Christian church, they'll leave you alone. So they incorporated it as a Christian church. And as Quanah Parker used to say, the white man goes into his church and he talks about Jesus. The red man goes into his teepee, eats peyote, and talks with Jesus. Food for thought. You will also find the same sorts of things, and I wish there were a couple of people here tonight that couldn't be here. I was trying to get them here, who are more experienced than I with the usage of ayahuasca. But you'll find the same thing. All psychedelic experience that is used in this way is controlled deeply through ceremony. And the ceremony will have various different components depending on what culture you're looking at. But they all will accomplish the same thing, which is to give you a ground to stand on, a foundation to work from, and an idea of how to look to find what you need, plus skills to handle the occasional weirdness. I can tell you that back in the Haight, I was a very popular fellow because there was nobody better than I that I can think of bringing people down from bad trips, because I knew the territory and I knew how to do it. And I would sometimes just sit and quietly sing into somebody's ear the proper peyote song, and they would just mellow out.
They're lucky they had you.
Yeah, well, maybe, I guess. Yeah. So, is there a place for this in the work? The answer is yes. Will it ever be popularized? God, I hope not. The thing about this is that true psychedelics, by which I mean the ones that work on this particular array of receptors, break down your cultural conditioning. And it specifically breaks down the conditioning in along the lines of where you can and cannot see. Each and every one of us is trained to not see things. We can see this, but not that. We can look here, but not there. We're allowed to think of this, but we're not allowed to think of that. We can ask these questions, but we can't ask those questions. And psychedelics will wipe out that conditioning and allow you to ask questions that would otherwise be inconceivable. This is why the government hated them so incredibly much, is because they are designed to break down your cultural conditioning. And if you break down your cultural conditioning, you stop being a good cog in the vast machine. The vast machine is a term that I stole from somewhere for culture in general. And specifically, culture created by the unconscious actions of human beings. Culture after the Great Disaster. So if you want to free yourself from that conditioning, psychedelics are a powerful tool to do that. The unfortunate thing is that most people don't know how to do it, even with it, which is why you had such negative effects in the 60s. And you had people who would, drop a lot of acid and never get anywhere. Though on the other hand, you had things, y'all know about Timothy Leary's prison project? You ever hear about that? It's pretty much been wiped from the history books. Ilmar, you might know about it. You may be old enough to remember that.
He does, yeah. But you probably want to give everyone a brief.
Yeah, it's nice to know when I'm not the only person who remembers this stuff. So back when
Dave was nodding as well, so you're not alone. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, back when Tim Leary was working at Harvard, he started experimenting with Dick Alpert and later on Ralph Metzner with this interesting substance that was developed in the 40s called lysergic acid diethylamide. And he discovered that you could do certain things with it, and he got some grants, and he began using it on volunteers from a prison population to see if he could alter their behavior to make them less inclined to crime and more inclined to living lives that would keep them out of prison. And interestingly, he crafted the experience almost ceremonially. And he put these prisoners through it, and wonder of wonders, most of the people who went through it, there was like an 80% of the people who went through this project had not returned to prison within 5 years, which is pretty phenomenal, because usually it's like 80% will return to prison in 1 year. He literally repatterned their consciousness and changed their imprints, as it were, broke down their conditioning and repatterned it to make them unwilling to do criminal things. He kind of gave them consciences. And it was, for the time, wildly successful, and then completely suppressed by the government. In part because Leary, you know, like a lot of people who discover something very cool, he wanted to share his toys with everybody. And he was considered very, very dangerous by the establishment. And he was, you know, his reputation was systematically destroyed. He was turned into a comic book villain, and he kind of played along with it a little bit, which was unfortunate. But yeah, so all of his work was discredited because of that, because he decided that, yeah, probably everybody should do acid. And probably everybody shouldn't do acid. Let me state that unequivocally. Psychedelics are not for everyone. Like I said, in the cultures that use them, you are trained from an early age in how to deal with them. And you are often, at least in the Iranian, the people who still do this in the Iranian plateau, or used to still do it, because I don't know if there's any of them still alive, or if they've all been wiped out by the fascist fundamentalists. I just lost my train of thought.
You were talking about, you know, how the structure is important, and it's probably not a good idea for everyone to do.
Yes.
LSD.
And you would have to be screened for a couple of years usually to be deemed a proper candidate for this sort of experience, and trained deeply in meditative techniques, learning to navigate your own psyche before you are given the rocket fuel that allows you to achieve escape velocity, as it were. And my own opinion is that's the way it should be, because this is some powerful shit. Psychedelics are not recreational and should not be used that way, in my humble opinion. That's what ganja is for. So there is my answer to the question of, is there a place for teacher plants in the work? The answer is yes, there is a place. It's an interesting place, and it is a place that allows you to make huge leaps in short amount of time. But it requires preparation. It requires knowing what you're doing, and it requires having guides who know what they're doing. In the Native American Church, there are very specific guides. There are 4 men and 1 woman who are they're known as the officers, and each has a ceremonial position, and each helps control the ceremony. And if somebody is getting a little ungrounded, they're the ones that put you back together. And they get trained for years to do that. Usually it's a family tradition that's handed down from family to family. So
We have a remark or a question.
Okay.
Ilmar.
From Ilmar.
Ilmar says, I assume that the ceremonies in general set and setting that happen. Would you like to read it?
Sure.
Ilmar? Yeah,
Sure.
take the opportunity.
Yeah.
What I'm assuming is that, the ceremonies and the general set and settings that happen in, say, the Native American Church, Sufi circles, so forth, are themselves a form of conditioning, right? They predispose the participant to certain types of experiences, right? And I guess what I'm wondering is, to what extent is this a process of filtering out from the possible set of experiences, the ones that are important for that person? Or contrary, to what extent is it creating experiences which otherwise wouldn't independently be there? To what extent are these ceremonial set and settings themselves creative of the experience,
Well,
as opposed to filtering?
If I were to answer you from the position of a member of the Native American Church, I would say that they are not creating the experience. They are, in fact, filtering and tuning you to the frequency of the spirit of the medicine, so that you can work together. That would be their way of looking at it, because to a member of the church, peyote is a living being. It is inherent in the cactus, but it is beyond the cactus. That's why I say it's part of the morphic field. It is the morphic consciousness of peyote, which is a sort of a meta consciousness that is benevolent towards human beings for the most part. And that seems to be true of all of the true psychedelics. I experienced the same thing with mushrooms, is that the consciousness of psilocybin mushrooms is pretty symbiotic and benevolent to humans. I mean, it doesn't like to be disrespected. And it's the same with soma and ayahuasca. They all deal with a force that is somehow symbiotic and benevolent towards human beings, that will work with you to get you to places that would be difficult for you to otherwise get to, but to which you have a complete right. The thing to remember about all of these substances is that the reason that they work is that they are nearly identical to your own neurotransmitters. We are pretty sure that your body produces DMT. It definitely produces serotonin, which is a form of DMT. But it seems especially the pineal gland may produce small amounts of DMT under certain circumstances. So we are in some way naturally aligned with this other spiritual force. Now, to the other part of the question, the scientist in me would say it is likely that we are crafting a way to get outside of the box. And, being as the experience is completely subjective in some ways, it's hard to say what's what. I'm comfortable with either model. I tend to lean towards the shamanic model a little bit more, which may say more about me than it does about the reality of the situation. I don't know. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and so you experienced this as a separate consciousness that somehow was symbiotic to you,
Yes.
or because I don't see that same kind of thing happening in certain LSD experiences. Now I'm wondering whether that's the difference between the two psychedelics, or just because of the difference in set and setting, or I mean, what?
It could be.
I mean, I'm very curious about
both. Remember, LSD is a synthetic.
Right.
And so it is not going to have the same experience.
Yeah.
Like I said, yeah.
We just have a relevant question from Nancy who asks, does LSD have a consciousness?
In my experience, maybe, but it's not the same. I have a feeling that it taps into the same realms as DMT does, but not as well.
Okay, so I'm sorry, continue.
So yeah, my experience is that there is a consciousness in the actual plants that you don't find in the synthetics. It's like it's the same thing with MDMA and MMDA and all of those, which are all related to mescaline, but they don't have that same profound effect, which is not to say that they aren't useful for a lot of things.
And so, again, maybe this is not for a public forum anyway, but I'm wondering, to what extent is it the fact that you see it as a separate consciousness, presumably a benevolent consciousnness, how important is that to the actual experience? I would think it would be something that would make it feel safer, because it's almost like having a guide there then? Or...
Yeah, I do know, because I've seen a lot of folks that did not get raised into the tradition to come into it later in life. And it took a little while for them to make that transition to realizing that they were dealing with a living spirit. And once they did, then it became much easier. And just because it's benevolent doesn't mean that it's necessarily nice.
Right.
Yeah. I remember my father used to say, that peyote will go right to the weakest part of you, and it will hold that up and show it to you. And then it'll give you the strength to deal with it. That was his experience and how he described it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So my own sense is that you can take either of those two models and they'll both work. And for me, the model of the teacher plant as an actual spiritual being or spiritual force works better for me.
Okay.
Omar, this thing about structured versus not structured, I will tell you, I jumped when I read about how generic American mindfulness meditation is only a very small part of the actual tradition of meditation, and that there's a whole lot of it where they include ethics and I don't know what all else, because they don't assume that you will just rebalance yourself. And
right. I mean, are you talking something like the Buddhist Eightfold Way that includes a lot of other stuff besides just, okay.
Yeah, the Buddhist Eightfold Way, the 8 forms of yoga, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I have a certain degree of, I'm not completely comfortable with the idea of an spiritual entity somehow residing in the plants, but that's probably because I haven't had your type of experience, you know. But
yeah. And like I said, either model would work. I'm pretty sure. I just think my model works better for me.
Yeah. See, but what I find interesting, and this is again, it's a different topic altogether, is what I'd love to see is what stays consistent between one model and another. In other words, for a model to work, it has to somehow fit what it's modeling, you know. And if multiple models all fit the same thing, then the intersection of those should point to something pretty deep structurally there. But that's
likely so.
a long discussion.
I'm going to send you like 5 pounds of dried mushrooms, and I want you to experiment until you know the answer to that.
Okay, I'll look in my mailbox.
I am, of course, just kidding, but that would be the only way I know of that you could figure that one out. And it's hard to say. Some people are more comfortable with one position over the other, but the most important meta position of this is the breaking down of neural conditioning that real psychedelics do for you. The smashing of the cultural conditionings that hold you stuck in one place. That is pretty much universal to the psychedelic experience, as far as I can tell.
And after it breaks it down, does it point you in a particular direction, or does it just simply leave you now open and you need the structure and the setting and the guide to...
Yeah, you need that to be able to reconstitute it into something healthy.
Gotcha.
Because in using Leary's terms, powerful psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline create points of imprint vulnerability. And as we know from the works of Lorentz, if you are imprint vulnerable, you can imprint on anything. Just ask that poor duck that is sexually attracted to ping pong balls. So the job of the ceremony is to keep you channeled in ways that you take a positive imprint. And we see this, the Native American church is notorious for being able to help Native people with alcoholism where nothing else works. 12-step programs are worthless on the reservation, in my personal opinion. But Native American church will get people off alcohol and living a straight life very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. And so we're assuming, of course, that in all of these, I mean, there are basically good ceremonies, and presumably there could be bad ceremonies. In other words, we're assuming that the restructuring that's going to happen is a good restructuring by whatever definition of good we happen to have here. But I mean, it seems like there's really needs to be quite a serious exploration of how that, I mean, what is being, in what direction is the restructuring being done?
Yeah, and this is an interesting problem, and this is why it is definitely not for everybody and highly controlled. Think about Charlie Manson and how he reprogrammed his so-called family to do whatever he wanted them to do. Trust me, there was a lot of LSD involved in that.
Yep, yep, yep.
And that's one of the dangers that you have here, is that an unscrupulous person can reprogram you to anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it almost seems like you've got to have a certain amount of wisdom entering in to be able to choose which channel, so to speak, which channel to allow. Whoops, sorry, my English is getting tripped up here. Which channel is a good channel for you to restructure it along? You know.
Oh yeah, almost without a doubt, because you know, here in this culture, we have random restructuring for the most part because, you know, as you grow up, you don't go through the ceremonial things that help foster proper imprinting. But yeah,
which in a way is the same problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, after you.
No, I was going to say it's a very similar problem to this whole lack of initiation for young men into adulthood, into manhood. You know,
and
there
a lack of initiation of young women into womanhood too.
Exactly. You know, but I deal more with men in the Mankind Project, obviously. But yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. I'm from the Southwest, where amongst a lot of the tribes, the single most important ceremony is the woman's puberty rite, the girl's puberty rite, which at the culmination of it, the girl who is going through the ceremony becomes one with, depending on the tribe, white painted woman or changing woman, and is literally channeling the goddess, as they say, which is as important for women as men's rights are for men, maybe even more so. I don't know. Apaches seem to think so.
Which points, in a sense, to the importance of tradition, which also has a flip side. We want to break out of tradition very often, you know.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a difference between what we mean by tradition and what we mean these days by culture.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, any more thoughts? Zainab, I've been talking about Iranian people this whole time and you've been completely silent.
This gives me the idea of maybe when I get old, I'll do that in Iran.
Do you know the seed that I'm talking about? I don't remember the Farsi name for it.
No, I need to look it up. I'm not sure. I need to look up the Farsi.
Yeah, it's in English it's called Syrian rue or black rue sometimes. And the Latin name is Pigalum harmala. And I can't remember the Farsi name, but it's a pretty common seed to find in people's pantries.
I have to look that up.
Yeah, and the seed itself, just used by itself, will have interesting antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects as well.
Do they burn it as well? Or?
Yes, they burn it like an incense.
Oh, could it be Esfand?
I think that might be it.
Something to investigate.
Something to investigate, yes. All right, so this has been a fun and weird talk.
We had a thought from Nancy, and I just want to hold on to it till we talked about that other stuff. She says, I've wondered about hippie burnout versus hippie craftsman. What affects the outcome? It may be less of a sharp distinction than I think.
I think that there's a couple of things. The people who I would think of as hippie craftsmen tended to have a stronger community around them. Hippie burnouts tended to be isolative, not being connected with a close group. And the hippie burnouts would oftentimes get way involved in drugs that were not psychedelic. Interestingly, there are 9 neurotransmitters that are specifically mind-altering. And it occurred to me that they fit perfectly on an Enneagram, and I'm going to have to do that. But And opioids are 9 receptors, you might say, but they work with neurotransmitters. And I can tell you what they are. Acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, GABA, opioids, cannabinoids, and histamines, all of which have mind-altering effects. Of the 9, serotonin is the one that produces the true psychedelic experience. The various teacher plants will hit that receptor site, plus they will play with some of the other ones. Like they'll play with the norepinephrine site, they'll play with the acetylcholine site, they'll play with the dopamine site, they'll play them all as if they were playing a chord, but the tonic note of the chord is that serotonin. So that's all I got.
At least for now. Any other questions or thoughts?
And did I answer your question good enough, Nancy?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, there's the general thing of you have to start with good instincts somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And Mustaqim has a very important question.
Yes, he says, for a place like here, Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
Where almost all psychedelics are illegal, are there any replacements, or are there things, exercises, practices that are as powerful as psychedelics?
There are not anything that are as quick acting, but there are some things that are as powerful. The breath practices are very, very powerful and can produce very interesting alternate, very interesting states, some of which will produce points of imprint vulnerability. There are physical exercises that you can do, and there are some substances that are usually not illegal, but you would have to check your local laws, that are called nootropics. Nootropics are known as smart drugs. They are not as powerful for the most part as psychedelics, but they will work along some of the same neurotransmitter lines. And you know, here in the US, they are the most useful ones are completely legal. And I can actually highly recommend the occasional use of a nootropic, both natural and synthetic. So I'll give you an example of a natural nootropic. Is lemon balm, Melissia officinalis. Lemon balm is a member of the mint family, and Melissia is very calming and will wake you right up at the same time. It's quite good for you, and it's even tasty. Melissia tea is wonderful. Slow effect and mild effect compared to some of the things that we're talking about, but nobody's going to bust you for lemon balm tea. Another nootropic that is very, very common is caffeine.
I was going to suggest caffeine. Yay.
Yay. Yeah, caffeine is a good mind-altering substance, and it's one that Sufis like. Yeah, Sufis really got into caffeine when it started getting imported to Yemen and dispersed around, because it allowed you to stay up all night doing your practices. Another,
so we have,
yeah.
Yeah, continue.
Oh yeah, actually, Ilmar, I was just thinking of Stan Groff. His holotropic breath work was something that produces a lot of the same effects. Yeah, so that's an area to look, and he's one of the old timers. So he's actually he's got a lot of mileage behind his techniques. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, just about plant spirits. I was thinking about Findhorn.
Findhorn is a good place to think about that sort of thing, because they use that model there and it worked remarkably well. Another interesting nootropic that is legal everywhere is L-theanine, which is a non-essential amino acid that is most commonly found in green tea. And it will literally sharpen your mind and calm your body at the same time. As a matter of fact, I will tell you that I use L-theanine every day, 100 milligrams of it in my coffee, because it cuts all of the jittery effects of the caffeine. And we slipped Noor some a couple weeks ago.
Yes, I'm very sensitive to caffeine, so I prefer to have the edge taken off a little bit with some theanine.
Yep, and it definitely keeps your mind clearer.
It does.
Yep, and it's completely harmless.
No one's gonna bust you for it or anything like that.
Yeah. So, my answer to the question that was posed at the beginning of this is yes, there is a place for teacher plants in the work. It is a very specific place. It's a very narrow place. And it's not for everybody, but for the right people at the right time, it can produce amazingly powerful results. Sometimes it can be that last step that allows you to go through ego dissolution and reconstruction in hours rather than years. And it is not phony. It is not fake, because it is based on your own neurotransmitters and your own work. There is nothing that you do under psychedelics that you can't do without them. It's just, it's a lubricant. Mm-hmm. But it is definitely not for everybody, and it is definitely not recreational. It is something that has been used since time immemorial in a profoundly ceremonial way for consciousness exploration. And anybody who wants to party with ayahuasca is crazy. Just saying. All right, any last thoughts? then you know what time it is.
Commercial time.
It's commercial time.
Bad
So
time.
let me throw the commercials at you. First of all, I didn't say this at the beginning of the talk, but I'm going to say it now. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do feel free to hit that subscribe button down there. It's right over here, usually. Yeah, down there. And subscribe to our channel, because then you will be able to know when we do these, and hit the little bell so that you can be informed when we upload something new. We would love to have you as a member of our channel. It makes us look good. And I'm too proud to go out and like buy members. So I have to do this organically. So, yep. So yeah, please do subscribe. So things coming up. In the near future, Noor and I are going to be doing a multi-part Enneagram workshop that is an online course. It will be free. The caveat is that to get into it, you must be a member of the forum, and you must have been a member of the forum for more than a month or two. You know, then this is to prevent people from, you know, just joining the forum so that they can ask to be part of this. It's going to be limited to probably 10 people. What it's going to be is, most of you have seen the Ultimate Enneagram, which was a good course, and it was a good overview of the Enneagram process, or as I like to call it, the real Enneagram. But it's pretty superficial compared to the amount of information that's there. So we're thinking of doing a course that really drills down into the mechanics of using the Enneagram process as the universal hieroglyphic that Gurdjieff talked about. Like I said, there will be no cost for this. You need to message Kyle and I privately with your application for it, and we will select probably not more than 10 people. If you don't get selected, don't worry. You'll still get all of the information. The other caveat is that we want you to actually attend this. We want you to be with us like this on camera, because this will be turned into a course that we will then market to the masses. And it helps to have the interaction.
Yeah, it's a growing step for us as teachers, and we want to take what we've learned thus far about sharing this material and take some further steps to just, you know, dig into the nuances and be able to share more.
Yeah, so we would really like for y'all to be here. It would be a wonderful thing to have you. And so that's the first announcement. The next announcement is, of course, you can book private time with either the amazing Noor Kyle.
That's me.
That's her. Or me. For one-on-one work. Yep. And we're both pretty good at what we do, and we do it a little bit differently. So it's nice to have a choice.
Yep.
And I will tell you that Kyle is much nicer than I am.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. I don't know. Did you slap David around?
Did I slap you around, David?
I think in retrospect, a little bit.
Because we like you, David. So,
And we are running our perennial special where you can get 6 sessions from either of us for half price. Our usual fee is $100 an hour, which is still incredibly reasonable. If you went to a therapist who just sat there and repeated back to you everything that you said, you'd pay $150 to $175 an hour, and they wouldn't even tell you how to get enlightened. But our usual fee is $100 an hour, but for the duration of the special, you can get 6 sessions for $50 a session. Half price. So you can you can take us out for a test drive and find out whether or not we are somebody you would like to work with.
Mm-hmm. That is allowed, yes, because this is work. It is work, and you got to make sure you have a good team to support you through it. Gotta have a good fit.
Yep. So those are the 2 main things for right now. There is more in the offing, but I don't want to keep you guys too long. So with no further ado, this is the Nine-Sided Circle signing off.